Hello and welcome to our Wednesday webinar from the International Centre for Sustainable Carbon. My name is Benedicta and I'm part of the communications team here. Our monthly webinars are based on our technical reports, which are available from our website, sustainable-carbon.org. Residents of our member countries and employees of sponsoring organizations can download our reports at no charge after a one-off registration on our website. I'll just say, please type any questions you have during this webinar in the question box as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. The subject for today's webinar is the value of CCS in the net zero emissions electricity systems. Presented by Yoga Pratama. Over to you, Yogama.
All right, thank you very much, Benedicta, for introducing. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon in London time. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. Today, I'm going to present one of our work in collaboration with the International Centre for Sustainable Carbon. This study is about the value of CCS in net zero emissions electricity systems. My name is Wienda Pratama. I'm from Imperial College London, and I work with my supervisor, Niall Dowell, throughout this study. Okay. Before we jump into the main content of these presentations, I would like to show a little bit about the presentation outline. Here we're going to discuss a little bit about the background of this study, and then in the results section, we are going to discuss about the country-specific results, which emphasize more on the value of CCS in low-carbon electricity systems. After that, we will focus our discussion a little bit on the focus for technology improvements, and finally, we conclude our webinar with the conclusions and Q&A from the audience. And these slides summarize the key findings that I'm going to present in the rest of this presentation. So basically here we have 5 different case studies, including Poland, Germany, Indonesia, Vietnam, and also South Korea. And we have also evaluated several scenarios in our studies, namely BAU, all technologies, no CCS, and renewables and storage scenario. And this graph shows different total system cost in different scenarios in each country, where the color code here shows the percentage of electricity demand that is satisfied by the system. This electricity demand is cumulative between 2020 and 2050. The key message from this graph is that scenario that heavily relying on renewable and storage, that exclusively relying on renewable and storage deployments tends to increase the cost of meeting the net zero emissions demand. In addition to that, the scenario also tend to lead to unmet electricity demand. This is particularly the case for countries with rapidly increasing demand with limited experience in deploying renewables and also storage in their systems, such as Indonesia and Vietnam. These studies also show that CCS is consistently valuable in all case studies, although other dispatchable technologies such as storage and nuclear are allowed to be deployed in the system. However, without CCS, the cost of meeting net zero emissions target in the system will be significantly higher compared to the cost if we allow CCS to be deployed in meeting the target. So for the background of this study, we know that the net zero emissions target has become a global ambition. Like 1 or 2 decades ago, we mostly discussed about the cost reduction. We discussed about CO2 emissions reduction in our energy systems. But since 2015, in Paris Agreement, we aim for limiting global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius. In order to achieve this target, net zero emissions in our energy systems, including the electricity systems, will be a key to be achieved by between 2050 and 2070, with some requirements of CO2 removal from the atmosphere thereafter. The implication of this target is that coal-fired capacity in some regions, such as US, EU, and also Russia, is expected to decline. However, the greater challenge of meeting this target lies in the developing economies in Africa and Asia-Pacific regions, where in these regions, we anticipate an appreciable increase in both coal and gas-fired capacity. Accordingly, without CCS, coal and the presence of coal and gas capacity in those regions will hinder progress towards climate change mitigation. Therefore, the objective of this study is to quantify the value of CCS equipped fossil power generation technologies in electricity systems, and knowing the role and value CCS will play in those systems, we then can identify key economic parameters for CCS improvements. This includes the technology cost, thermal efficiency, and capture rate. Among many countries that have pledged to be net zero emissions in the future, here we include Germany, Poland, Indonesia, particularly the Jamali power system, Vietnam, and also South Korea as cases. This is to reflect different system characteristics of different electricity systems, and therefore different challenge they might have to face in order to meet their net zero emissions target. In this study, we added scenario-based approach. Here we have BAU, all technologies or all tech scenario, renewable, and also renewable and storage or restore scenario. In the BAU scenario, the prevailing policies are maintained. For example, current carbon price in European Union in EU ETS are maintained, which is around $100 per ton CO2. Moreover, nuclear coal bans in Germany and also South Korea are also maintained until 2050. And also onshore wind bans in Poland is also maintained until the end of our planning horizons. In this BAU scenario, we don't have a net zero emissions target, but in the all tech scenario or all tech scenario, we do have net zero emissions target, in which in order to meet this target, all technologies are allowed to be deployed except for nuclear because of this, usually because of the safety concern of the technology. Although in some countries, for example, in Germany, new coal power plants are not allowed. But here we, in this study, we allow new coal power plants to be deployed because the possibility of retrofitting the technology with CCS in order to meet the net zero emissions target are also evaluated. In the restore scenario, we still have the net zero emissions target. However, compared to the all tech scenario, we only allows the system to exclusively deploy variable renewable energy and storage in the systems. So basically, no nuclear and no CCS in this scenario. In addition to this scenario, we also evaluate the impact of uncertainties in the future. Here we also we take into account different range of technology cost, thermal plants efficiency, and then capture rates for CCS and also future fuel prices. In the Monte Carlo analysis types modeling and research, we compare the scenario with and without CCS. Here is the results for Poland. What we can see here is that in Poland there are some. This is the results for BAU and also Altex scenario in Poland. Here in the BAU scenario, what we can see here is that in Poland, because of the high current value of carbon price in 2020 that is maintained until 2050, then the country needs to retrofit its coal fleets by CCS in order to minimize the total sum cost. Here, because of this high carbon price in the regions, then the carbon intensity in Poland will significantly decreases from around 600 kilogram CO2 per megawatt hour to somewhere around 50 kilogram per megawatt hour in 2050. In the Altex scenario, here we found that CCS allow the continued use of existing technologies when stringent emissions target are imposed on the system. Here, interestingly, although we aim for net zero emissions target in the system, coal is still being used in Poland. Under renewables and storage scenario, we thought CCS Poland may experience some suppressed demand between 2025 and 2040. This is because in 2020, the existing capacity in Poland is heavily dominated by unabated coal power plants, and therefore an immediate emissions reductions in 2025 in order to meet 2050 emissions target will require the country to reduce its electricity generation. Because of that, although in restore scenario, the cost of generating electricity will be comparable to the cost of generating electricity in Altex and also BAU scenario, the total system cost will be significantly higher. This is because the high cost of unmet demand in the country. In Germany, interestingly, despite the high variable renewable energy bit rate, we see that here in the BAU scenario, we show that fossil capacity is still required to cost effectively maintain system reliability, and this is particularly from unabated CCGT, because technology can provide more flexibility in a more cost-effective manner compared to other technologies. Similarly, if we impose a net zero emissions target by 2050, our results also shows an interesting findings that the role of unabated CCGT is only slightly is reduced, but overall the role of gas power plants in the country is maintained. The difference here is that in Altex scenario, we generate electricity from CCS equipped CCGT power plants. Here we also need to generate some electricity from bioenergy with CCS, particularly to move up the residual emissions from these fossil plants. In the restore scenario, like Poland, we found that restore scenario in Germany can meet all the demand, but the problem is that the capacity needs to be increased to 5 times the size of the current capacity. Here we also show that the role of interseasonal storage will be prominent in the country in order to maintain the system's reliability, particularly when in 2050, where all dispatchable thermal plants is retired in the country. Notwithstanding this, the cost of meeting net zero emissions target in the country under renewables and storage scenario will be double the cost of meeting the same target under Altex scenario where CCS is allowed to be deployed. In Indonesia, here's the results for BAU and Altex scenario. Well, what we can see here is that without net zero target, coal and gas will dominate Indonesia's electricity system from 2020 to 2050, but particularly coal will dominate the share of electricity mix in the country. This is particularly the case in Indonesia because the price of coal in Indonesia is significantly cheaper than the price of natural gas. In net zero transition, under Altex scenario, we found that the role of coal will moderately decrease, and coal plants are equipped with CCS by 2050. In this scenario, we also we show that electricity mix in the country will become significantly more diverse compared to the results in the Altex scenario. In the restore scenario in the country, we found that under restore scenario, 48% of electricity demand between 2020 and 2050 is suppressed, and that interseasonal storage capacity will need to be installed in a large scale capacity in the country in order to minimize this unmet electricity demand in Indonesia. Here we show the comparison of total system cost in the country in BAU, Altex, and restore scenario in Indonesia. As I mentioned before, because of the significant share of electricity demand is not met, then the total system cost in the restore scenario will be significantly higher compared to the BAU and Altex scenario, and this cost will be dominated by cost of unmet demand. Moreover, in the Vietnam case study, similar to Indonesia, we also see that coal electricity will dominate electricity generation mix in Vietnam under the BAU scenario. Compared to Indonesia, owing to its potential, biomass and hydropower in the country will play a considerable role in Vietnam. In the Altex scenario, in the net zero emission transition, we also see that Vietnam will increase the role of gas and biomass, and because of this, the electricity mix in the systems becomes significantly more diverse. And interestingly, although we need to meet the net zero emissions by 2050, coal will still have a significant role to be played in the country. Here we will also see a significant generation from BECCS required in order to mop up the residual emissions from coal and gas plants. In restore scenario, we see here is that 42% of electricity demand between 2020 and 2050 is suppressed, although the country is endowed with a significant potential of hydropower plants. However, we see here is that this capacity remains high. In Vietnam, here we show that the total system cost is significantly higher in restore scenario compared to Altex and BAU scenario. What we can see here is that similar to Indonesia, although the cost of meeting electricity demand is low, the cost of meeting the net zero emissions target is lower in Altex scenario, but this is from the power generation cost only, and the cost of not meeting electricity demand and therefore reduced economic growth in the country will be significantly higher. Finally, this is the results for South Korea in BAU and technologies. Here we found that without net zero target, the role of fossil is maintained and nuclear capacity is gradually decreasing due to bans on new power plants. Interestingly, in the Alltech scenario, where we have to meet the net zero emissions target by 2050, CCS will play an important role in South Korea. Here we show that the share of fossil-based generations in South Korea is still high, but compared to the BAU scenario, here mostly the electricity is generated using CCS-equipped power plants. Similar to Germany, here in South Korea, owing to the advanced domestic industries on renewables and storage technologies in the country, we can see that under restore scenario, South Korea can meet all its electricity demand from 2020 and 2050. In this scenario, interseasonal storage will play an important role to maintain system reliability in the country. Here, again, we compare the total system cost in generating electricity in South Korea under BAU, Alltech, and restore scenario. Notwithstanding of the benefits of the countries with advanced industries in renewables and storage technologies, we found that in restore scenario, the cost of meeting net zero emission targets still high. In this session, we will discuss a bit about the value of CCS in low carbon electricity systems. What we can see here is that the carbon intensity in 2050, this is the targets. So we have 200, 150, 10, and 0 kilogram per megawatt hour in 2050. The y-axis here is, shows the total system cost in billion US$. The circle plot shows the results of scenario with CCS, and then the rectangular plot here shows the results of scenarios without CCS. Color code here shows the capacity of CCS in 2050 in gigawatt. What we can find here is that in all case studies in Poland, Germany, and South Korea, in order to meet carbon intensity of 50 to 200 kilogram per megawatt hour in 2050, the scenarios with and without CCS shows a comparable results in terms of total cost. However, when we need to achieve net zero emissions target, which is aligned with the Paris Agreement, CCS shows a significant value in which the cost without S will be double the share, the range of cost with CCS in Poland, Germany, and South Korea. And here we also shows that in Indonesia and Vietnam, the value of CCS becomes prominent because not only without CCS, not only it will increase the total system cost, but also it will reduce the system's capability to meeting all the demand. So from these results, we show that regardless the cost, efficiency, capture rate, and fuel prices in the future, CCS will consistently valuable in all cases that we evaluated. To conclude my presentations, here we show that technology choices may impose challenges associated with maintaining system reliability, and that technology agnostic approach enables cost-effective decarbonization in all cases. Here we also found that both coal and gas CCS are critical in the transition to net zero emissions, and that in order to improve the competitiveness of coal CCS and in order to maximize the value of this technology, then high capture rate and efficiency improvement will be a key. And finally, there is no one size fits for all technology that can meet all grid requirements. So thank you very much. That's the end of my presentations, and I'm happy to receive some questions from the audience. And also, if the audience required to discuss more detailed questions, then feel free to send me an email in this email address. Thank you.
Yeah, while we're waiting for a couple of the questions to come in, I guess we can just say the report on this subject will be out shortly in a couple of months. Isn't that right, Yoga?
Yeah, I think so. So at the moment, sorry, in the production with the production stuff, and hopefully it will be out in a couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah. I see there's a couple of questions come in, Yoga. Can you see them?
Oh yeah, I can see it. Thank you very much. We have two questions from Debo and from Andrew. First question is from Debo. The question is, do you think there would be many countries that currently using coal or gas where CCS would not be of value? Thank you very much for this question, Depo. This is really interesting. So from the studies that we run from here, basically CCS can provide values to the system in two ways. The first obvious way is that it can provide countries that currently that currently their existing capacity is dominated by coal and gas. CCS will allow these countries to continue using their existing fleets, so there will be some savings in terms of in terms of the cost of deploying new technologies. And here we can use existing capacity to generate electricity, but we need to just install retrofit the plants with CCS. And the second part is that from all the results that we show in this presentation, we found that renewables capacity will consistently increase in all case studies. And because of this increase in renewables capacity, then the value of capacity for from dispatchable technologies such as CCS will becomes more prominent in order to maintain the system's reliability. Whilst, as I mentioned before, there might be some options to provide capacity for the system. We can use nuclear, for example, or we can also use electricity storage. But compared to coal and gas CCS, the cost of ensuring the system's reliability using these technologies is still significantly more expensive than the cost of providing the same service using coal and gas CCS. And therefore, I believe that in all countries, it becomes clear that the use of CCS will be consistently a value. There is some comments from Andrew, very important messages, but still we see policymakers ignoring these findings. That's from Andrew. Yeah, we agree with this, but I think this is something that we can show from our results. Let me get back to a couple of slides before this. So basically, if we see the results in Poland, Germany, and South Korea, as I mentioned before, to meet carbon intensity between 50 to 200 kilogram per megawatt hour, the cost of with and without CCS are comparable. So this, I believe, contributes to, let's say, the false preoccupation that CCS cannot provide significantly value for the system. But this graph that I show here also gives a clear message, I think, to policymakers that CCS will become increasingly more valuable, particularly in the later period in our planning horizons, where the systems need to be very low in terms of carbon intensity. So it's not about what's the value of CCS at the present, but the value it can provide in the future, and therefore we need to prepare for the infrastructure to basically accelerate the deployment of CCS. That's more or less the comment that I can give to you, Andrew, about your comment here. There is another comment from Andrew. Given the implied energy security issues, this suggests further role for coal once CCS is included. CCS is included. Again, how do we get policy makers to notice? Well, that's really tough question. So basically, in this study, Andrew, we tried to tackle CCS issues from several point of views. Yes, here in these presentations, I only show you some results about, let's say, the scenario based approach results. But in the report that's about to be published by by us, we also discussed a bit about the policy mechanisms in order to drive the CCS deployments in the future. There are so many issues that we need to address actually in order to make, let's say, the policymakers to be aware with the value of CCS. In many countries, in many policy discussions, we also see mostly discuss the value of technology according to the cost of electricity generation, or simply the LCOE. But we see that in the 21st century, the systems becomes more diverse. The system's operations becomes more challenging, and therefore electricity service is not the only service that needs to be focused on in the 21st century electricity systems development. And I think first step that we can introduce to, let's say, improve the awareness of policymakers about the value of dispatchable low carbon and dispatchable technologies such as CCS is by leaving the LCOE type analysis and focus more on the system approach analysis in making the energy policies, because using the systems wide approach, we can basically quantify all values, the the grid requires from the system, and therefore all values the technology can provide to the system will also explicitly be accounted for. That's, I think, the first step that we need to, push forward.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Yoga. I think
Thank you.
this is it. I think all that's left for me to say here is that the slides from this webinar will be available to download from the webinar page of our website right after here. And thank you so much to you all for joining us today, and goodbye.
Goodbye.